All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about security and the composable web. And I've got my Slack beeping. I will try to sort that out. A little housekeeping before we get started. All participants are in listen-only mode, so you'll be muted. The session is being recorded, but we do ask that you ask questions throughout. You'll notice in the Zoom panel, there'll be a Q&A button. It's typically beside the raise hand and chat buttons. So feel free to ask your questions in there, and we'll get them to at the end of the portion of the talk. We'll answer the questions there. Just want to give a reminder to please respect our community code of conduct. You can check that out at jamstack.org/code of conduct. All right. So here's what we're going to have for today's discussion with our wonderful panel. And from there, we're going to just see about our panel here. We've got our panel that's serving every industry, public and private sectors. There's diverse points of references and partnering for better customer outcomes. And let's meet our speakers. Mark, if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, Mark Dorsey, CISO at Netlify.
And Jamika?
Hi, I'm Jamika Green-Aaron. I'm the CISO of Auth0 by Okta.
Awesome, thanks. And Steve, did you want to go ahead?
Hi, Steve Ampleford. I'm CEO of Atomus.
Awesome. And Mike, if you just want to go ahead.
Sure, yeah, I'm Mike Waltieri. I'm a security engineer here at Netlify, new because of the acquisition of Gatsby. And as of just 4 weeks ago or so, I was the security and compliance lead at Gatsby for a couple of years.
Yeah, welcome to the team. All right, so yeah, so we're going to be talking about security in a composable web architecture. So I'm just going to leave this here for a few seconds here, just for folks to kind of ramp back up on what composable web architecture is, if you're not familiar with the terminology. And from there, I think let's talk security. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen here, and I'll invite the panel to go ahead and let's start this discussion.
Yeah, security in the composable web. I think all of us are here as a result of sort of our interactions between our different products and services and those sorts of things. And we've really been driving to this over the last couple of years, where we're trying to really make that composition occur. And our customers are wanting to bring together more and more technologies over time. And as a result, our technologies are adapting to that so that we can really service their requirements. And it really is that demand that's driving the market. And as we've seen in sort of recent years, we're having to make plenty of changes so that from a security perspective, from a product perspective, we're able to take all those integrations, really make them happen seamlessly over time. So I'm quite excited to have this chat today with each one of these folks and really get into it a bit. But that's really where we are. And our goal is, as sort of composers from a customer's perspective, and really have this orchestra available for them in front of them in order to be able to make this amazing symphony of things that are going to come together so that we can really make this composable web an amazing sort of place to be. Really exciting.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing, Mark. So yeah, for the others, how do we describe a composable architecture, and how does this differ from more traditional architecture? I know Mark already left some thoughts, but if others have some thoughts.
Sure, I have some thoughts. I think composable architecture differs in that previously we were reliant on, we were probably overly reliant, I should say. We were overly reliant on our vendors to do a multitude of things and do them well, and architect them really, really well. And composable architecture is not saying that that's not still something that we can do. It's saying that you can rely on a vendor to do one thing really well, a small thing. So for us at Okta and Auth0, it's identity. we are focused on building identity and doing that really well. And there are other areas, and this is something that I see all the time, especially with our chief product officers and our CTOs. Customers will ask for hey, we want you to do other things because we want you to be on one platform. And we're like, well, that's not exactly what we do, but we do know a vendor. And I think this is where partnerships amongst the vendors become critical, because we have to have the ability to be neutral and interact with many other vendors across the web. And so I love this idea of composable architecture and the way that vendors are adapting to really getting good at what they do and doing that well and doing it securely.
Yeah, no, that's great. Oh, Steve, you're on mute.
So I'll build on the security point. I think it's where it gets interesting is in a traditional architecture, you have a fairly large attack surface and you can't really control the entry points as well. And so it gets much more, particularly with legacy architectures, you're finding yourself fairly exposed. Whereas as you move towards composable and you're looking at far more controlled APIs between different functions, you're able to much more tightly control your inbounds, the ingress into your platform. And as you evolve over time, which always happens, and you grow and expand, you're able to plug in additional features, vendors, products without sitting there and exposing and creating a larger attack surface. So for us, it's a much more defensible platform, and one that we find ourselves that a lot of customers are much more comfortable moving towards, rather than this very traditional monolithic, painful structure that creates a maintenance burden and there's a lot of frictional effects as you sit there and expand upon that.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo some of Steve's comments there too. The way I kind of conceptually look at what a composable architecture looks like, it reminds me of microservices architecture that you might see a lot in backend cloud infrastructure. You take these different little components and you have this payments component or this authentication component and the front end data being served up, and you take all these together. They're kind of stateless. They do one thing. The data can be compartmentalized inside those areas, and then it becomes much more difficult for an adversary to move laterally through the entire application because of all these distinct components. It's not impossible if it's architected well, but it becomes more difficult.
I think Mike and Steve, you both brought up something that isn't like, we are talking about this in industry in the way that we're talking about it right now. We are typically talking about how third-party vendors and how vendors tend to be the entry level, and we're flipping that on its head now and saying, no, there's actually a way to offer better protection because lateral movement can be limited with these composable architecture type microservices. And I think that that's an important point from a security perspective, and we're seeing that happen as we look at exploits across the industry. We're seeing vendors are being attacked, but the ability for those attackers to move laterally is severely limited to that vendor. And so they're taking what they can get and get out of house. And I think that that's a marked change in how we have this conversation, because typically when we have this kind of conversation, we talk about the ways in which vendors can allow us to be compromised. But what we're not talking about is the fact that with a composable architecture, there are levels of protection, and it essentially helps us create defense in depth. It creates those layers of security. It creates a zero trust. And I think that that's what's really important. And when it's done well, this architecture can really help boost your security.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I think that's one of the major challenges too. Like it starts to bring new things, or we have to change the way we do detection and response. Now all of a sudden it's this, okay, wait, who's been compromised? How does it affect us? In what ways does it affect us? Because yeah, the lateral movement, has been changed. And I love that point. I think it's interesting though to try and then make the determination, okay, now what is the big problem at this point? Like what has been compromised, and do we have sort of the proper asset inventory in place in order to say, yes, okay, now we understand what's been compromised. This is the sort of challenge. And then do we need to then interact with the vendor in a special way because they're actually very critical to us or something else? So it's really interesting to kind of bridge that gap as we go forward.
And then coming in as an attacker, it's a far more defensible architecture, because even if you do compromise, you're still struggling to pivot across the rest of the platform. So the lateral movement is very important here. So then you start looking at other ways to attack. You're now looking towards your technical supply chain, and so you're finding your evolution of your defense posture is changing. That whereas previously you would build a bigger firewall, build a bigger walls, a bigger castle, now you're having to look far more around your technical supply chain. Are there libraries that can be included which will pull in a compromise into your architecture? So you're having to look wider to defend, but that's because it's an evolution and we are getting more advanced in our defense, and therefore clearly attackers are going to get more advanced in their attacks. But what we're doing is pushing your defense further away from your core. And so you're protecting, if you like, protecting the crown jewels in the center, and you're pushing that attacker further away from you.
Yeah.
I think that, I think that the piece there, which is around like, it's changing, right? So yes, we've always wanted to have good key hygiene and be careful with secrets management, but it's become more important than ever, right? So you have separate keys and for separate things, and it really is that way, right? Because they're doorways into your infrastructure. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, you kind of hit on exactly what I was going for, and what Steve was saying. Supply chain security becomes the biggest issue in composable architecture, right? And it's a hot button issue all over the industry right now. Secrets management, what data you're exposing where is critical. So there's no magic bullet to solving supply chain security, but what you can do is architect your applications securely. And by this, I mean understanding what data is inside your application and where. And then if you have to provision keys, try to get those as narrow as possible, right? Having a org level key or read write key when you only need read. These are assumptions that can and should be tested, right? You architect your application in what you believe to be a secure manner, and then you go up against that application with offensive testing to say, I don't believe there's an attack path from this component to that component. They shouldn't communicate. Is that true? And then you have some testers hammer away at it and validate that, yes, at least as far as we can tell, that attack path is not available.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Mike. It kind of ties into what we were going to start discussing next, but a few you've already kind of touched on it, but I'll just say it out more formally. So what do you say to those who believe combining multiple services introduces more security challenges than using a single monolithic or a built rather than bought system? And is that the case? And what approaches exist to simplify and mitigate that?
I think that anytime you evolve an architecture, you're going to expose more threats and more vulnerabilities. I think by bringing in security as part of your design rather than trying to bolt it on after the event, which tends to happen as a terrible simplification, but of monolithic architectures. It's a bit of a gross, slightly unkind on some, but now that we're moving towards composable as an example, where you do have multiple functions, you are exposing more to your attacker, but you are able to control that far, far better. And through decent design of security and looking at, for example, API gateways, where you very, very strictly control your data pathways, you very strictly control the level of access that comes through that we've already discussed previously, then you're limiting what an attacker can sit there and achieve. So if it's done badly, it's going to make it worse. That's true of any industry, and particularly the security space. But as an overall principle that's in the cybersecurity space, it's an absolute colossal step forward, providing it's done well.
I think we've been saying for a long time that APIs would become the attack vector, and we haven't really seen that yet. What we are seeing is still traditional attacks on like MFA. And so they're still incredibly successful. And so when we think about, and I'm not saying that just because we're not an identity company, although it's what I see a lot. But we are still seeing, when we think about successful attacks and exploits and breaches that have happened, they are still on things that we know better than to not leave secured. And so they're still on our employees, they're still on the consumers. And I think, and they're, because we're compiling some of our legacy technologies with some of these new technologies that leverage composable architecture. And I think that that's the reason why we're seeing the level of attack. But when we dive into it and we look at the root cause of an attack, we go, oh, it's two-factor authentication. And so I think that what we have to do as leaders in industry is say, you know what, yes, we are aware of these risks. Secure by design is one of the tenets of our product and engineering team. We're also looking at privacy by design. So when a tenant is built out of the box, it comes with all of our previous learnings built into it. So secrets management, key management, all of those things are built into the architecture. And I think that that's the gift of composable architecture. I think when we think about what's actually happening in industry, it's still these very traditional attacks. Very rarely are we seeing super sophisticated attacks on APIs that are effective and actually are able to take advantage of lateral movement. That's not happening. What we're still seeing is some very traditional things that we should have fixed a long time ago.
Yeah,
I think that's where it's critical. Go ahead, man.
No, Jamika, I think you know, the adage goes, it's always a sophisticated attack when it was successful, right? But what you said, you know, attacks on auth systems is a huge way adversaries gain access to applications and to organizations, right? And if you can decouple the content layer out of your application, and let's just say your application is very simple. It's going to be, well, it doesn't, I don't know, simples. It might be, let's say it's a content heavy WordPress site that you're decoupling that content out, that auth, the database, all that can be segmented away, isolated from the public internet, and then all you have available is that front end website. But you know, when you look at there are security challenges, of course, with composable architecture. There are security challenges with monolithic. They don't go away by changing the application architecture. They're just different. But your biggest way to secure a monolithic application is patch management. And we know historically, going back, you know, 20, 30 years, that organizations are still like really poor with patch management, even though it's often as simple as rolling out some patches, because, you know, vulnerabilities move very quickly. With composable, your biggest way to defend is with segmentation and you know, isolating that data away and just taking components that used to be exposed on the web and just not making them exposed at all anymore.
I think in the real world,
for many years,
we all accept that applications evolve and grow over time. And so in a monolithic environment, as engineers move out, as documentation goes out of date, as you get frictional effects of that evolution of your platform, you're pulling in more and more vulnerabilities. Whereas when you're looking towards a more either a microservice or a composable architecture, where you're bringing in additional functionality, you're bringing it in as a closed protected box with a defined in and out flow, and therefore not even by design, you can't help make it secure or more secure than you have in a traditional setup, because you're having to think about it. It's forcing you to have to restrict your data flows, and so you're not bringing in this legacy, open up everything, and the frictional maintenance effects that are traditional within a monolithic environment. And I think that's colossal, not now, but in 5 years' time, when we're all looking towards whatever the next composable 3 is, that we'll see the benefits of that as the overall industry finds themselves being less exposed to what we have been facing in the past.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think it's important too to have, no, I think it's important. Like for years we've said, you know, sort of don't roll your own auth. Like there's other people out there that do this, right? Don't roll your own, but now what we're seeing is with this architecture is, you know, in an increasing rate is don't roll your own asterisks. So don't roll your own API security, don't roll your own this, don't roll your own that. Bring in these best of breed products who have been trusted for, you know, a period of time, and you're now able to plug and play a lot of these technologies. And it does a couple of things for us, right? It keeps everybody on their toes, because you don't want to be one of the pluggable components that gets rolled out because you're having too many bad days in a row. But what you are looking for is this sort of, you know, if you don't have to, don't roll that piece. Focus on the content, focus on what your expertise is in delivering to your customer, and stop trying to do everything else. You know, we're providing this, you know, this platform of services and everything else that are available to you. go ahead and grab each one of those. Grab the best of breed, grab those ones you like. Maybe there's some cutting edge technology you're interested in. That's fantastic. Our goal here is that you're able to focus on the content and deliver that to your customers at speed. And that's really what this is all about. Go out, do what you want to do. But that's really where I think we're at. So don't roll your own asterisks. Just bring your content. Let everybody else do what they do best.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
and I think too, this kind of leads us into, we don't have this on our topic list, but I'll say this because I think we're all under the talent pipeline is thin. And so when we think about what you're saying, roll your own asterisks, this allows us to take advantage of the talent pipeline, number one, globally. There's a global talent pipeline that can be taken advantage of when you are leveraging composable architecture, because it doesn't matter where they are. So there's that. But I think there's also this idea that I think the way that security expertise, it's going to evolve as well. So maybe you don't have an identity person or a database person on staff. You've purchased those, or you've deployed those. What you do have is an API security person, because you need someone who's there, who understands the architecture, to make sure that those, as you weave this together, this tapestry together of composable architecture, that it's secure. And so maybe that's where you go in and you say, you know what, on our team, this is the level of expertise we're going to have for security, and it looks very different than what it looks like today. And I think that that's okay. Also, I think that that's probably the way of the future for many.
Yeah, no, that's great. This kind of, as we move along here, kind of ties in a bit to, folks alluded to some of this stuff already, but when you're designing the technical approach for your next project, what would be the key attributes that would influence your decisions about adopting a composable architecture? Everyone's kind of alluded to some good reasons, but just curious about people's thoughts again here.
For me in particular, if you're able to define different levels of security, authentication, or different levels of access, then you're able to tier, from a security perspective, tier your risk and hence tier your threat and countermeasures to that threat. So going back to Mark's point about separating out data, and Mike's point about keeping the data layer separate, and then being able to tier above that your functionality, and then so composable plays very well to that, and you can really strongly protect back to my comment earlier about the crown jewels. You can protect what's truly yours, and then above that you can have your functional layers. You can have your interactions into vendors for the additional functionality you're looking at, but you're able to work towards this tiered security architecture, tier of countermeasure. And for me, that plays straight away, becomes a composable conversation.
I would say for me, I think about, when I think about composable architecture, neutrality is important. Interoperability is important. The ability, the customers decide, the consumers decide. And so I think the ability for, when I say the customers, I mean, like you all are my customers. And so it is the customer's decision how they want our services to interact. Just like it's my decision on how my services interact with my product. And so I think that neutrality and that ability to be agnostic is what will help drive that evolution that Steve is talking about. And so those are kind of some of the key tenets that I look at. Security, of course, I'm a CISO. I'm always thinking about security and risk and all the other heavy hitters. But I think outside of those as being the kind of 1 and 2 tenets, neutrality and being vendor agnostic is really important.
And permitting the aggregation of best of breed. Where you are looking, the more complex you're looking as an overall offering, an overall product, the more you're looking towards using your best of breed vendors. And at that point, identity, why bother? Forget the roll your own, absolutely, but also go to best of breed, and you can combine best of breed of all your different functions. Now imagine that in a car manufacturing environment and trying to get best of breed of everything and stick it all together and hope the whole lot works together. It's never going to happen. You're going to end up with 6 wheels and 3 steering wheels. So at least in a composable environment, by having that rigor and the a very strict security-based API layer approach, it allows you to seamlessly combine those best of breed without bringing the pain and without bringing that friction in. And so I think over time, we're going to see some of the Web3 products that are coming through and the next generation are going to be looking more towards that similar architecture where we're able to, in effect, make ourselves agnostic of, we don't really care how it works, treat everything as a black box and just know that it functions, and push that. The danger there is that you're pushing that responsibility for security down to those vendors, but by controlling your APIs and your ingress, you're able to self-protect to a greater or lesser extent. And that's an evolution. That's not something we've been able to do when you're pulling in third-party vendors into a product. In the past, we've had to do that through management and through pushing it contractually or putting in technical countermeasures, whereas now you're getting it for free by using an API and approach, and Composable sits very, very well. So it's something that we're going to see more and more of, I think.
Yeah, I think building on that a little bit, it's that granularity, right? From the access token perspective, like how granular of an access token are you providing? Because it may be a read-only access token, but it's allowed to read all of the things. And so how are you careful about that? And what I'm really looking for from vendors going forward is to really take a moment to push back a bit on the type of token that I've generated or that I've allowed. If it's the wrong type of token, if my folks come in and they generate a token that's read-write and all the company actually needs is a read-only token to a subset of areas, tell me that. Let me know that actually, especially if we're in the implementation phase, let me know. Hey, this is really wide. We don't need this. We don't need all this access. This is not correct. Or something a little bit different there. So I think that's the big moment is that granularity. How do we get there as an industry? Make sure that that's available, and we continue to allow for those controls, because in a composable world, that's going to become super critical, as well as just that notification piece. This is a very wide key that you've provided here. Probably not the best of idea. We can see way too much. Please turn this down a bit, and then allow for that sort of trust but verify moment, so that, look, you have provided us this key, but we have a control in place that will stop us from reading that data using your key and us keeping it at all. And so that way it's a two-way street there. I think that's really critical as we go forward.
And testing will evolve, I think, to take account of that. So traditionally we've dealt with integration testing. Now we're going to be looking at effectively denial of permissions, and then gradually enabling that in order to be able to prove that vendors are satisfying their own commitments to us. So there's always going to be that evolution as we move forward of not just product, but also test and countermeasure.
I think one non-security reason why you want to move to a composable architecture is future-proofing your application. If you're rolling a large application, some new initiative in 2023, you should be looking at a composable architecture approach. This is not the year to be launching yet another monolithic application. So, in terms of, career progression too, for folks out there on the technical side, if you don't have a composable project at your fingertips, something that you're going to be doing in the next few months, start learning about this architecture and building that into your skill set, because chances are in the next year or so, you're going to start working on an application like this. And if you're a security tester, you want to stand out, there's 500,000, well, maybe not that many, but there's thousands and thousands of Active Directory network testers out there. You really want to stand out, start focusing on cloud, start focusing on API attacks and understanding the security implications of that, and bringing those skill sets to your clients.
Yeah, that's I got to say, you didn't do that on purpose, but you laid the perfect segue for the next subject. So, are there any trends in the security space which can benefit those adopting a composable architecture and those looking for work? Like Mike said, start creating those composable projects. So.
I think Mike hit the nail on the head. I think with what he just said about where the work is. We have a public bug bounty program. We have third-party pen testers, and we have an internal red team. So we have a multitude, and these are skill sets that are thin in the cloud. And so when we look at product-facing companies, and so I think this is one of those ones. When I talk about the talent pipeline, this is one of those ones where we're looking for that skill set, and it's contract. It's all over the place, but the work still needs to be done. done, we are incredibly responsive to all of our programs. And so one of the key tenets of this architecture being successful and being a company that's one of the tenets of this architecture is that we have to be responsive to attacks. And we have to be responsive to our bug bounty programs and our vulnerability testing and exports. And so we're always paying attention. And these are things that this is different than our monolithic architecture where you were sitting behind something. We're not sitting behind anything. And so I think that when we think about what's next and what's next for us, we have to continually be paying attention. It's our responsibility. So this isn't the type of architecture where you can push the responsibility off to another company. If your piece of that, if your part of that composable architecture is compromised, you're responsible. And so that's something that I think it isn't a push off. It isn't a oh, go look at this. It's look at this identity layer and we're responsible and we have to fix it. And so I think that's a marked difference from previous monolithic architectures where sometimes we don't know where the compromise is happening at. I think in this particular architecture, you know where it's happening, or you can pretty much figure it out pretty quickly.
I think also for us, we're finding that the skill sets that are needed, although yes, composable is new, it's as many things, it's an evolution of old, but also you're having to take those crown jewels are normally sitting there in some kind of monolithic legacy system. As the organization has grown, so the technology has had to evolve and it's now potentially creaking, but what you're not going to do is switch it off and then jump across and go, let's switch on something brand new and hope it all works. What you're looking at is how to transition from that legacy architecture to new, whether that's composable or whatever, or microservice. But then when you're going through that, you still need those skills in order to be able to, in effect, black box that old system, create that API interaction into be able to query your data set. And so although the skill sets, yes, are new, what you're really doing is repackaging what you've already got and then allowing the organization to move forward. And what that also allows to happen is that platform that you've got, that legacy environment, you can now carve out identity and you can now run that as a separate component. Now we've de-risked things, that's evolved, we're now feeling more comfortable. Let's go back to that legacy and we'll now carve out another function. And over a period of time, you've now moved your legacy environment across. But as a consequence, you still need those skills. So there is no job market that says, right, we're now moving out of this and we're now moving on to composable. Everybody, all those programmers that we used to have, bin them, let's start fresh. That world doesn't exist. In the real world, we have to sit there and be able to create that bridge from old to new. And those skills will evolve as a consequence as people transition across that bridge.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also, as we think about it, engineers tend to try and engineer something or over-engineer something or continue to work on something that shouldn't have existed in the first place or should have been done by another party. So I think that skill to be able to identify those things that we probably shouldn't maybe include or maybe should be done differently, and that ability to back out a bit and take a look at it from a different angle, I think that's going to be critical here, the composable web. I think folks may try and, what's old is new. That's always the case, but I think we have to take a moment and back up a little bit and say, okay, is this actually the way this needs to be done? Why does this thing exist in the first place? And we may find out that actually it doesn't need to exist anymore, or it really needs to evolve. And I think that's going to be an important skill set as we go forward, that sort of mind's eye towards the future.
Another trend that's been occurring over the last few years is, so-called infrastructure as code, where you get predictability out of your systems. And I think that translates really well to a composable architecture where your application's defining the components and what they're allowed to do. So that, you can build infrastructure and build services and build security as code. And that's all change controlled, it's reviewed. So there's a lot more eyes on things. It doesn't mean that problems can't occur. It means that there's more fail safes and predictability along the way when you design your applications.
Yeah, no, those are all really great points. Moving on to the next thing, for those selecting vendors to provide services as part of their architecture, what are or what should be the primary considerations with regards to compliance and security?
I mean, don't even come to me unless you have a good pen test report, and it better be from a good vendor. And I'm going to be critical about that. So yeah, I expect compliance. I expect SOC 2, something equivalent, something that shows you're using industry-wide best practices, but that's not good enough. I want to see with my own eyes how things have been tested and the scope, and make sure things aren't too narrow and it's been done in a quality manner.
I would add on to what Mike said, but I'll tell you, we also still are super fans of open source. We are still thinking about the scrappy startups, because we are both Okta and Auth0 come from scrappy startups. And so we're still looking at new companies and leveraging new technologies for ourselves as well as vendors. And so what we do expect is maturity from the vendors. And so as you evolve as a vendor, we expect you to eventually get to SOC 2. We expect you to get to CSA. We expect you to get to ISO. And so I think I still look at a lot of vendors. We still look at a lot of open source vendors, a lot of new vendors, with the expectation that as they mature and grow, that they will get to a steady state of security. But we also look at them as partners as well. And so I think it's important because these things are expensive. Let's just be honest. SOC 2 is expensive. It's and so we don't expect that from our new and upstart vendors. But we do we're transparent in this idea that we expect you to get there at some point. And so yes, we're looking at security. We're also looking at I think longevity of a company. We don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we integrate with a new partner and then they fall apart. And so we're really looking at the business itself. And is this business viable? Is this something that we can see? We can see some key indicators of where this market might be going from an identity perspective. Do we think that long term this is the right partnership to make?
I'll build on Jamaica's point that around the partnership, that in order for you to adopt your own security posture, you need to be able to trust and have confidence in your partners. We do that usually through some kind of deed of connection, whereby you're providing a commitment to be transparent. Let's not shoot somebody because they've had an error. Let's deal with the issue. Let's learn from it. And it's got to be that that maturity of relationship that allows you to go, put your hand up and go, this didn't work, but how do we learn from it? Because if you don't work towards that and you do hide it, although commercially short term that may seem like a better option, long term that's just creating a bigger and bigger vulnerability, and we all need to learn from it. The industry needs to be able to learn and evolve from it, which is where bounty programs become very interesting. I know Okta do a lot around that, but I think it's about having that maturity of conversation with your vendor about how you expect each other to work, but also accepting that it's your own security posture. You have to define what's acceptable to you, and you have to provide your own controls in order to achieve that. You can't outsource security. You can't outsource that trust. You need to be able to have that relationship into your vendors, yes, but you can't sit there and go, I wash my hands of everything. It's now someone else's problem. And so that allows you to bring open source. It allows you to bring on younger companies who have innovation tends to come generally from the smaller companies, and it allows you to bring that innovation through, but without taking the penalty for it.
Yeah, I think it's all about understanding the risk for me, and just the level of the level of integration that we're going to have with another company. One of the things that we're doing today at Netlify is that when we speak to our enterprise customers and we're doing these sort of quarterly reviews with them, we do try and bring the security components of it and really talk to them about how they're doing from a 2FA implementation perspective, or what's going on in their environment, so that it's really clear that we're putting our best foot forward when it comes to security, or at least we're making an attempt to do so, and really taking a look at it from the customer's perspective. You could be doing these other things. We want to help you get there. This is how we could do them now. And if a company doesn't have all those sort of articles in place, maybe it is a new company, maybe it is a startup or something to that effect, then bring to us, sort of your best foot forward when it comes to security. Let us know what you're doing. Let us know that you're being really considerate with our data, and that you've really thought about, this is how we're going to affect your risk posture. These are the things that we should have in place. If you take that approach, I'm going to have, a far more trusting moment with you than any other moment that we might have together.
And it works both ways. By pushing one's security needs and what one's expectations are down to a less mature company that is at the early stages of their evolution, you're helping them provide a better product for their customers, and you're helping change their or evolve their thinking in terms of what they develop in the future. So there are benefits. One's not sitting there and just being a dictatorship and stating this is what you need to do. It has to be, again, there's the benefit there to the partner of being able to upskill, of being able to generate and offer a better product as a consequence. And so both companies can move forward in a better position.
I think no matter what, we know we can't transfer liability. And so one of the things I hate to see in our industry is when we finger point at each other, because I'm like, we all know as CISOs and as security professionals, you cannot transfer liability to another company. You get compromised, you get breached, it's on you. And no matter what we say publicly, at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to protect our own products, no matter what that product is. And so I think that's the other piece. This is why all of these tying all of what we've said together is critical. It's important to have the new vendors. It's important to have the pen test. It's important to have API security. It's important to think about composable as a method to help prevent lateral movement. All of this becomes a consideration in risk, and it becomes a consideration that we must think about when we think about our risk posture, because ultimately the liability will be on you and your individual company, and there's no amount of media that's going to save you from a lawsuit. And so you've got to make sure that your risk that you've accepted on behalf of your company, that you're comfortable with it, and that your leadership teams are comfortable with it.
I think the leadership one is particularly interesting. I think we're seeing more and more now that CISOs are becoming a board level essential part of the board, that you're now seeing the IT and the cybersecurity conversations taking place within boards. Previously, the cybersecurity would sit somewhere probably under the IT director, under the finance director, and now you're needing to have that board position. You're now needing to consider the impacts and the risk that the organization is carrying, and therefore let's have someone in the boardroom who can shoulder that responsibility, but has sufficient empowerment in order to be able to do so. So as we're seeing technologies evolve, as we're seeing mindsets and platforms evolve, so we're also seeing the businesses themselves evolve, how they deal with what they're now shouldering and where those risks sit, and how to sit there and get that into that management decision.
Yeah, no, all really great talking points. We're gonna hit the Q&A soon, but I was just wondering if anybody else had just a couple more thoughts before we move over to the Q&A. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think just, one to think about here, and just so it's kind of clear, especially with this composable web, is that if you think about it, our customers now are the composers. The groups like the folks like Netlify, we're that conductor, and we're conducting that orchestra of amazing products, of course, like the ones that you see here, and services. And the overall goal is that our customers are able to put together this symphony of services for their customers, so it can really make an amazing web. And I'm super excited to be a part of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, no,
I'm
same
stealing
here.
that, the symphony of services. I'm going to steal that one. So when you hear me say it, just know that I got it from you.
There we go. That's awesome. Yeah, and as a developer, I love being able to compose all these things. It's such a great time to be in web dev. Honestly, it's well, I know people talk about it can be overwhelming, but I think it's exciting as well. There's just so much great stuff going on, and yeah, no, I just wanted to thank all of you for chatting here today. We're going to move over to the Q&A in a second here. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. And if folks who are attending the webinar just want to use the QR codes there, feel free to give a follow to all our panel here. Lots of great folks here. Yeah, so we're going to move into some questions here. So one I have here is, I'm not sure exactly what it means, but that's why you're the panel. Will there be industry standards for the lateral structure? I'm not sure if that's clear enough or not.
I mean, if you're
I think
talking, if you're talking the lateral structure being the API, then I would say yes. And that's something Netlify is working towards with our Content Hub product. So that basically what I'm saying there is that if there's a common language that all these components speak to, that is the goal. I'm not sure if we're going to see like RFC specs anytime soon, but I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, I can see there being industry norms and best practice, but I'm not sure we'll be able to get to a standard at this stage, because we're not able, I don't think things have got to the stage where we can be sufficiently agnostic over what the data flows are to be able to define what the standard should be between different products. So I think we're going to end up, I think there's a stepping stones to get there. I think that's a little way off, but certainly best practice and industry and industry norms that one would expect to see from partners, and then how that will feed through into some of the wider industry standards, and that may then flow down. But I think it's going to be, for me, I think it's going to be too big a challenge at the moment to take that leap to industry standard, although I would like to see it. I just don't think we've got the maturity of that product at the moment. Jamaica,
And I think because our industry is so developer centric, it's the developer symphony. See, I got that really quickly. I think because it's the developer symphony, I think that maybe strict standards are not going to happen right now. Maybe in the future, but I think that right now it's super important that this is a developer centric way of Composable is a developer centric technology. It's meant to be something that developers can use or do use. And I think when you introduce standards, it stifles creativity and innovation a little bit. And so I think it's important that what we're doing right now is kind of writing the music for it. I do think that there will be industry best practices eventually, though.
No, great. Just one final question here before we wrap up. What does a supply chain incident look like, and what are some strategies on how to architect a solution that is more resilient to such a breach?
Looks like pure hell. That's what it looks like. I think that the best strategy that I have learned, and I have a little bit of experience, is transparency amongst vendors. Our communication and transparency with one another is one of the greatest superpowers that we will have in this industry and composable architecture. It's critically important that we are transparent and that we are able to notify one another in a way that's not punitive. A lot of the reason why we don't get more information, and even for me, there are times when I reach out to my vendors and I hear nothing back, and I know why that is. It's not because they don't want to talk to me. It's because they feel like it's punitive in nature. What is punitive in nature is actually not talking to me, because oftentimes I just want to know what happened and see if there's something that I can do or value that I can add. During many incidents that I've been a part of, many of the CISOs and security teams that I've had the pleasure of talking to have been so gracious and so kind, even down to asking about the mental health of my detection and response team. I've not gotten yelled at by a CISO or a vendor one time. Oftentimes there's a lot of curiosity and wanting to open the door to connection and conversation. That is going to be the thing that either moves our industry forward or leaves the security industry in the space that we're in right now. We have to have the ability to communicate amongst industry with one another. And we can't rely on external entities to do it for us or law enforcement to do it for us. We have to have an open door of communication with one another around security events and incidents and breaches that are happening, because we have these really talented teams who can actually stop this in motion if we are communicating at the right levels.
Yeah, it's this one security team where we really do need to become one security team. I think, the ISACA type organizations that are out there that have been there for years around incident response teams for some of the larger organizations have existed for many years, but as sort of smaller players in the game, we do need to leverage our network and find out what's going on from an overall sort of the latest incident. And now it does fly pretty well, but we need to do a better job there, where we are not only information sharing about the latest things that we've done, but information sharing about the latest things we've seen going on, and do it quickly. We don't need to do it necessarily in a public forum. or something to that effect. But the idea is that we share so that each one of us can get better, as it goes forward. The attacker has very low cost in order to attack, but for all of us, it's a very high cost to defend. And those attackers only need to be right once. And they can be right once and then be right once across each and every one of us using the exact same method, the exact same attack. And that's, that's sort of our tragic role, right? That's where we are today. But if we come together as one security team, we can then really leverage all of our knowledge, because, it is back to Janika's very early point. The shortage of talent is just that talent that was, here on my team today will be on somebody else's team tomorrow. And they were amazing at what they did. But why do we all lose that resource when they go from organization, to organization? It really shouldn't be that way. Those attackers is a cheap attack for them. They can come right through many, many times. But for us, it's super expensive, and we need to find shortcuts the way through that. And of course, communication is sort of that first moment that'll help us get there.
So I think building on both of those points, I think one of the big things I'd like to see is improved tooling in the security space. So for example, SIEM tools at the moment are heavily vendor specific. And as we're expanding the boundary of where we're pushing our security out down to vendors, we need to be able to have the inflow of SIEM logs and the like that allow us to understand what's taking place within our entire estate rather than our physical estate. And so in defense, governments can sit there and dictate, right, you will share all of your logs with us. But in the commercial space, that's viewed as very commercially sensitive. And that needs to change as we move towards, in particular, composable, where you are looking at bringing in multiple vendors. You need to be able to push your security boundary out. And in order to be able to do that, you need to be able to have data. And if you can't have data, you can't understand what's going on. And so when you have multiple minor events that aggregate across your estate, and it may only be your estate that sees that, then you're not going to find yourself needing to have that change tool set. And we don't have that as in the security space at the moment. Yeah.
No, that's really great. I love the conversations here today. We're a little over time, so I've put up the slide with everybody's QR codes there. If folks do have follow-up questions, definitely feel free to reach out to all our wonderful panel. I know we had some other questions in the Q&A. We weren't able to get to them, but again, feel free to reach out to folks. Thanks again, everybody, for attending, and that's a wrap.